1917 brought Stalin not just to the pinnacle of power within his party, but to the pinnacle of power in the country, to the government. How did this happen? The time that Stalin spent in exile was really momentous for Russia. Russia participated in the First World War, and it suffered humiliating defeats. Russia lost 2 million lives, more than any European power. The war showed how rotten the Russian system was. About 1/3 of its army lacked either ammunition or boots or bedding. The army needed about 100,000 rifles every month. And the factories, Russian factories, were only able to supply 42,000. There was not enough food because the railways were not coping. At the beginning of the war, Russia had 20,000 locomotives. By the end of the war, it had 9,000. So all these locomotives were busy taking the ammunition to the front, but there was no money and no trains to take the bread to the cities. Commanders at the fronts quarreled with one another and sometimes did not even communicate with one another. So the Russian army by the end of the war was in a state of collapse. Just at that time, in February 1917, revolution started in Petrograd. Petrograd was how St. Petersburg was renamed with the beginning of the war. On 24th February, 200,000 people were on strike or on demonstrations, then 250,000. You can see the slogans. Slogans were all about food. Feed the children, the future defenders of the motherland. The Tsar did not find anything better than to dissolve the Duma. It was the fourth Duma. The situation was absolutely critical, and the Tsar was not in Petrograd. He remained in the army. He has been at the fronts for 2 years, and his presence was needed at the capital. He was not there. The Duma refused to disband. The Tsar did not take the situation seriously, perhaps because his wife wrote to him that everything was okay and that the Duma is exaggerating the danger. By 28 February, the Petrograd garrison mutinied. It consisted of young recruits because the more experienced soldiers were at the fronts. So these recruits did not want to be sent to the fronts. And here they saw the opportunity to avoid this. And then they supported the workers. Moreover, they collected arms and ammunition specifically to arm the workers. 40,000 rifles were collected and handed in to the workers. So the government actually found itself without any defense. The Tsar tried to return to Petrograd, but his train was stopped at Pskov. There was no way to go further because either the railway was not properly maintained, or it was controlled by the revolutionary workers or soldiers. So it was where, on the 2nd of March, the Tsar signed his own abdication. At first he abdicated in favor of his son, but almost immediately he changed his mind and abdicated in favor of Grand Duke Mikhail. And he found that it was easier for him to abdicate than to actually limit his own power. The abdication was signed in a railway car, and it was a very low-key affair. but it was important. It was important in terms of the army because the soldiers gave their oath of allegiance to the Tsar, and now the Tsar was not there, because Mikhail was the Tsar only for 2 days. And after that he abdicated as well. He called on the Russian population to subject themselves to the rule of the Duma, which meant provisional committee which the Duma created. The news of the abdication was met with joy in Petrograd. Here are the revolutionary soldiers in Petrograd rejoicing. But that situation created a dual power. The revolution created dual power. What did it mean? On 27th February, provisional government or provisional committee at first was created by the Duma. It consisted mostly of the bourgeois parties. Simultaneously, the workers and soldiers created Petrograd Soviet, recreating that form of government which was first created during the 1905 revolution. The Petrograd Soviet consisted mostly of socialist parties, Menshevik, socialist revolutionaries, and Bolsheviks. Out of these three lots, Mensheviks and socialist revolutionaries thought that the revolution is bourgeois and it should be bourgeois because the country is not ready for the socialist revolution, and that it should wait for the revolution in the West to happen. So they agreed to support the provisional government on condition that it would implement measures offered by the Petrograd Soviet and it would not act against the revolution. Gradually, the Mensheviks and the socialist revolutionaries became members of the provisional government, or at least some of them. Bolsheviks never did, and they did not want to cooperate with bourgeois parties. This is a meeting of the provisional government. You can see how it is all orderly and all very nice. This is a meeting of the Petrograd Soviet of Soldiers' Deputies. Look at the numbers, first of all. And it is a completely different crowd. And, of course, Soviet of Soldiers' Deputies, but there was also a Petrograd Soviet of Workers' Deputies. And the two later on merged. So it was a democratic body, Soviet. Because every member was elected, but it was crowd democracy. There was no secret ballot, and very often the person who could speak the loudest actually won the argument. Nikolai Chiidze, the leader of Mensheviks, and Alexander Kerensky, the leader of the moderate socialist revolutionaries, were the two representatives of the Soviets at the provisional government. Where the power was in reality, you could see from these pictures where the power was. It was quite obvious that where there were the soldiers, there was power. But nothing showed it as clearly as the Order Number 1. This was the order published by the Petrograd Soviet, and the order was about the army and about how it should behave. First of all army units should elect committees and representatives to the Soviet, and that all the weapons should be controlled by the committees, and that all the units should carry out the orders only of these committees. 9 million copies were published. These are soldiers greeting this Order Number 1, and this is at the front. You can imagine what happened to the fronts after that. Alexander Guchkov, who was Minister of War in the Provisional Government, said, "The Provisional Government does not have any real power, and its directives are implemented only as long as the Soviet of Workers and Soldiers' Deputies allows. The Soviet controls all the mechanisms of real power, such as troops, railways, postal service, and telegraph. The provisional government exists only while the Soviets allow it.